Okay, so I need to record this just because it's driving me freaking nuts. I've been doing a lot of research into CBD recently. I've been doing it over a long period of time, which is why I use it and whatever. But yeah, I have CBD that I take, and I usually vape it in an aerosol form. And it doesn't really, it's not the same as like smoking like THC, right? Like the stuff that I have is like basically 20-to-1 ratio. So in the amount that I smoke, I'm maybe getting like 1 milligram of THC, which is really negligible in the grand scheme, to like 1 milligram of THC to about 30 milligrams of CBD. And there's a lot of research that suggests that CBD downregulates the CB1 receptor in the brain, which stops the body from absorbing THC. And just some preliminary things that I would like to say about this is that there's studies that are like, oh, well, CBD doesn't actually reduce THC in the system, because when people take high ratios of CBD to THC, there's more THC in the bloodstream. Therefore, there's more THC that's having an effect on the body. And that makes no sense to me for many reasons. But the main thing is that if CBD is downregulating the CB1 receptor in the brain, then THC is not pairing to the CB1 receptor in the brain. That's the main mechanism of how CBD protects against the THC issue. So there's a downregulation of that receptor, and therefore the THC doesn't pair to it, which means where does it go? Into the bloodstream, which means in your blood there would be a higher THC ratio when you have CBD in your body than if you just had THC alone, right? That makes sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that your body is using that THC or that THC is creating an effect or having a negative effect on you. It's just in your blood, and eventually it will get mopped up because it's not being used. So eventually, as it passes through those receptors and it doesn't actually bind to anything, it goes to other places and it gets filtered out and cleaned, right? So there is that. And so there's a lot of science that states that, THC, there's more THC in the blood or whatever. So again, if you're having like a 30-to-1 ratio of like CBD to THC, right, you probably don't really got to worry about it anyways, because the amount of THC that's in it is so minor that it's not going to have really an effect. But even then, the CBD, it should be basically bouncing the THC out of your brain a little bit and protecting against that as well. So that's the first thing I would like to know. But this was the study that really pissed me off the other day that I was making like a Reddit post on. I made a Reddit post and my post got deleted because my account was made too soon, and then my account got banned from Reddit because, Reddit. But anyways, this study, the reason why I'm so pissed is because there's so many things that point to this study as this is why, like, they're like basically like CBD doesn't work, it makes THC worse, and it THC will do bad things to your brain. Also, there's another study that suggests that microdosing THC, which in humans would be like a little less than 1 milligram based on the study, because it was done in rats and it was like 0.002 milligrams per kilogram or something like that. There is like a study that suggests that microdosing THC, this is not smoking weed. I just want to say that this is not smoking weed with THC in it, right? Like, you're not getting a microdose if you're getting high. This is specifically a small amount that's pretty much not going to produce any effects in the body. So like that 1 milligram might be around, a proper microdose in theory, but there is like a lot of studies that show that microdosing there's one study that shows that microdosing THC in rats actually produced a positive neuroprotective effect on the brain. But again, dose makes the poison, so you have to microdose it. So the amount that, one might get from CBD, like hemp flower, in that 30-to-1 ratio might be a microdose of THC. So whatever THC does end up getting to the brain might promote neurogenesis, neuroprotectivity, because it's basically stimulating the brain, but it's not overstimulating the brain, which is the problem with THC, is that it overstimulates the brain over a long period of time, produces a lot of like positive effects initially, right? Because you're just like, oh yeah, I'm late, you get high and you get all the happiness and whatever. This is not what I'm seeking, but like, again, I don't have any like issue. I'm very like THC weed positive. Like, I think people should be able to smoke it and do whatever they want, but there is like negatives associated with it, and I don't think that we should, like nobody's gonna argue with you if you're like, oh yeah, alcohol causes brain damage, right? Like THC also causes like brain issues. It's just not as dramatic as like alcohol or other hard drugs, but it still has its own subset of like issues. It's like, I drink a lot of caffeine, right? And caffeine releases a lot of dopamine. and stuff over time, and so there's a lot of positives associated with caffeine, but also caffeine causes dependence and causes, neurological shifts and whatever. It's just something that I'm okay with because the studies are very strong about it. And with THC, it's just like, it's not as beneficial, but it's not as negative as other things either. But again, it's something to consider. But the reason why I'm pissed off about the study is not because of anything regarding THC or anything like that. It is specifically because it is referring to CBD and saying that THC basically is compounded by CBD. And I'm going to show you why this study is really dubious, but there are so many things that are starting to point to this study as like basically demonizing CBD against these things. So let's go through this, and we're going to show the results of the study. So here's the study, I guess. I thought this was the study, but this is the study. There's a lot of things pointing to this study. And yeah, here we go. So, and this is how I research shit, by the way. I do not just like Google AI first click whatever. I do a lot of research. I look into a lot of papers and stuff like that, and that's why when I recommend supplements and stuff like that, I'm coming at it with a lot of well researched and thought out stuff. And I actually look into this, which is there's a lot of people that basically just look at this and they see this. They see this, right? They see like the findings and they're like, this is bad. And, they just kind of draw conclusions from that. And let me just go by why this is so bad. I gotta search for it now because it's been a second since I've looked into it. But basically, where is it? Methods. Here we go. So here's what they did. They had people eat weed brownies. Where is it? Methods. Participants. Study and design procedures. So completed. So 14 outpatient experimental sessions during which they consumed a brownie containing a vehicle, ethanol, in the place of cannabis extract, placebo, a brownie containing delta-9 THC dominant cannabis extract with 20 milligrams of THC, which, by the way, this is an extreme amount of THC. When it comes to THC versus CBD, a higher CBD ratio. So, like, when you take, like, 5 milligrams of THC, you might experience an effect. Whereas with CBD, the higher amount of CBD that you have, like, you have a high, especially orally versus intravenously or whatever it is, the inhalation of it. So orally, CBD has a really shit breakdown ratio, which is why like a lot of supplements have a lot of higher CBD ratios when they're orally administered. Whereas THC, your body breaks it down almost too well and breaks it down into a crazier form of itself. So when you eat THC, you actually have a crazier effect than when you breathe it in. So taking 20 milligrams of THC in one single brownie is kind of crazy. It's gonna create an effect no matter how much CBD is there. So no CBD. Brownie containing CBD dominant extract with 20 milligrams delta-9 THC and 640 milligrams of CBD. That's a substantial amount of CBD. But here's the other part of this that I think screws me up about this study, right? So there is a lot of studies that suggest that when there's CBD present in the brain, it downregulates the CB1 receptor and the THC bounces off that, right? But if you take them together, which, in theory, if you're getting 1 milligram from the inhalation and the whatever, the 30 grams of, 1 milligram THC, 30 milligrams of CBD. In theory, that THC still has a potential to bind it, but it's like there's a reason why people are like, oh, if you take CBD after, like, while you're high, it's going to make your high less crazy. This isn't true because the THC is already bound to all those receptors. So even if the CBD goes in and downregulates those receptors, they're already in use by the THC, right? And so this is where this study is a little dubious, because by orally taking so much THC and the CBD, yes, the CBD is going to be present, but remember, CBD orally is broken down a lot less effectively than THC when taken, eaten, or orally administered, right? So that CBD is going to be getting to the place it needs to go a lot less fast than the THC. And the THC content of these brownies is extremely high for this study. Like, 20 milligrams is just so unnecessary for, like, again, if you were smoking that, it might be a little different. I still think that that's, like, really unnecessary. You know, like, a lot of weed strains, like, you'd have to smoke, like, a gram to get, like, 15 milligrams of THC, which, by the way, that is not, like, that is a fat-ass fucking doobie. So this is a lot of THC in this brownie. And, again, it's broken down so much faster and so much more effectively than the CBD. So that's one. That's part one of why this study is dubious. And then there's more to this. So, brownie dose, where is it? So, washout. Where is the part? So there's a part, okay, here we go. Here's the other part that makes this extremely stupid and extremely dubious, by the way. 30 minutes after brownie administration, participants consumed established CYP cocktail of 5 probe drugs. That's right, 5 probe drugs. Caffeine, 100 milligrams. This one, I don't really see having much effect either way. That's fine. Omezaparole, 20 milligrams. Losartan, 25 milligrams. Dextromethorphan. Sorry, I'm having trouble. Whoever names these things needs to, like, fucking get kicked in the dong. Just name it, like, fucking Blammy juice or something. I don't know. Midazolam, 2 milligrams. During all 3 experimental sessions. So every single time they took a brownie, they administered 5 therapeutic grade pharmaceutical drugs. Right? And again, we can probably drop the caffeine as, like, something that's going to have, like, a crazy effect. But also consider caffeine interacts with different people. So if someone is prone to having anxiety after taking caffeine, 100 milligrams is not a small dose of caffeine. It's not a huge dose of caffeine, but it's enough to have a substantial effect. So if someone is, you know, like, prone to having anxiety or something like that, right, there's a chance that after they have this weed brownie, they take the caffeine and suddenly their THC effects, right, the THC negatives of this, like, anxiety or paranoia or something like that, this could be very much influenced by 100 milligrams of caffeine if they are sensitive to caffeine. And there's nothing in the study that says that the caffeine itself, like, that like, these people have been drinking caffeine or something like that beforehand, right? Like, they didn't test for that. So again, there's might be a small group of these people where caffeine is affecting the negative effects of THC, or sorry, is emulating the negative effects that they're having from the THC because they're sensitive to caffeine. Why they have them take caffeine, I'm not exactly sure. The other things, so this is what they say. This participants were instructed not to use any cannabis or cannabinoid products and tobacco products, caffeine, grapefruit, and other fruit juices. So they weren't having caffeine during this session. So again, right, like, they're getting not only just caffeine in general, but they're getting, like, a rush of this caffeine. So the reason why was to monitor the THC or whatever in their blood, which makes no sense. And as I previously established, right, if the THC isn't binding to the CB1 receptors in the brain because there's more CBD present that's downregulating those receptors, it would make sense that there's more THC in the blood, correct? So they're saying more CBD, more THC in blood. Fucking duh. Okay, cool. So now we understand that that's normal, and it doesn't mean that the THC is necessarily having a longer or crazier effect. It means that there's less THC binding to these receptors. But let's check out these other drugs that they have on there. This is what pisses me off about this study. And everything's fucking starting to point to the study. And I'm like, this study is not only dubious and bad, but it's like almost intentionally catered to get these results. So omezaparole. What does it say? Omezaparole is used to treat certain conditions where there's too much acid in the stomach. All right, so let's assume that someone is having acid reflux or something like that. They have an extreme amount of acid in their stomach. This is awesome. This is awesome for them. Cool. Whatever. However, if someone has a regular amount of stomach acid in their system, right, and we introduce something that reduces stomach acid, which 20 milligrams is like a pretty substantial dose, right? here's the thing, is that now we're introducing food into the body with less stomach acid. What does this result in? It results in, that's right, bing, 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 the food is going to have to digest over a longer period of time, meaning the compounds in the food are going to be digested over a longer period of time, meaning THC and CBD in the brownie is going to digest and be present in the blood and the body over a longer period of time. So saying that, oh, with CBD, the THC was present for a longer period of time, and then not saying that it's present for a longer period of time because of the mesoprol that's in this, right, is kind of just, that's not great. That's not a great... Oh, whoops. Hold up. Let me go back to the study. I got hit by an ad, and I just immediately ducked out. But yeah, but that's kind of shady, we'll say. So mesoprol. So again, assuming that their digestive process is slowed because of the mesoprol, or omeprazole, this is going to create a system where these compounds are in the system longer and taking longer to be. So when they say, oh, the effects, were elongated, I wonder if this has anything to do with it. And then we also have losartan. Okay, this is another one. So losartan is an angiotensin 2 receptor blocker. It works by blocking a substance in the body that causes blood vessels to tighten. As a result, losartan releases blood vessels. So it relaxes blood vessels, which means what? Higher blood flow, which means anything that's in the blood would be more prevalent in the blood because there's higher blood flow, which means all these compounds that are being digested and thrown into the bloodstream are now getting everywhere else more effectively, which means the ratio of them is going to be higher. Correct. So compound that with the idea that you have CBD in your system that's blocking the CB1 receptors, therefore there's more THC bouncing off these receptors going into the bloodstream, right? And they have nowhere to go because they can't pair to anything. And suddenly we have this other random pharmaceutical grade drug that's increasing blood flow, which means with the CBD in the system, there's more THC in the bloodstream, which again doesn't necessarily mean that it's being absorbed or used. In fact, it means that it's not being absorbed or used, right? Because it's prevalent in the bloodstream. And that's the thing, right? Is that they're saying that the THC is higher with the CBD. This is a good thing because it's not pairing to any of the receptors that it's supposed to be pairing to. It's bouncing off of them and it's in the bloodstream. And now it's more prevalent because we have this random drug that's increasing blood flow. And so it's putting it everywhere. Or it's not putting it anywhere. It's just putting the blood everywhere, which happens to be higher in this thing. This is two out of the 5 drugs. And again, caffeine, I'm willing to forgive the caffeine. But yeah, this is true for 2 of them. And then let's look into the other ones as well, because this is just extremely shady and bad. So is temporarily relieve cough caused by this. What else does it do, though? Stimulant, cough suppressant. Why did they even give him this? Is the question. What does it do? How does it do? So how does it? Okay, so therapy does it act centrally, meaning it acts on the brain as opposed to locally. It elevates the threshold for coughing without inhibiting ciliary activity. So rapidly absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract, converted into the active metabolite dextrofan. Let's see. I guess they're just fucking around and throwing it in there, because there doesn't seem to have any real purpose towards the study that I can think of. The other two, it's like I can kind of make an argument about like why you would try to like put that in there, right? Like, okay, we want to increase blood flow so that we can, measure the blood at a certain point. The other one is like maybe modulating stomach acid. Again, it makes no fucking sense, really, in the context of the study. But, there's like, it has altering effects. This is just like, I don't know, it has an opioid analogous, G6, which I believe means it's an antagonist. So, okay, so it has opioid. So it has opioid properties. Yeah, let's just fucking throw that in there while we're trying to moderate or measure just one single, interaction between two compounds. Fuck it, throw some opioid-like effects in there, because why not? No fucking clue why they threw that in there. It makes no fucking sense why they introduced that. Because, like, you could be like, oh, well, like, they smoked it, and therefore they should take this to increase the lung of response or something like that. But they aided it with a brownie. No smoking required. So why did they put something in there that increases coughing and has opioid like it just literally has no purpose in this cocktail that they've proposed, and they don't have any explanation as to why they gave this cocktail. It's really insane. So description: Midazolam is used to produce sleepiness or drowsiness and to relieve anxiety before surgery. So this relieves anxiety. So the whole effect of CBD versus THC, right? So when everyone's having the same response to that, basically the study said that, like, the subjective response to each study, right, like, was the same. And so, like, with the THC only route and then the CBD high route, right, they both had the same subjective high, which, again, we take into account that the THC is going to be metabolized a lot faster. It's going to hit a lot faster, and that 20 milligrams, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 20 milligrams of THC right out of nowhere is like a fucking heroic dose of THC for no reason. Like, again, you have to smoke like a gram of THC to get, like, on average 15 to 20 milligrams. And, like, a gram is a lot to smoke in one sitting. And, those are people who are, like, trying to get blasted, right? And, again, like, most people who are getting blasted don't really give a shit about it. They're just doing it. But, again, that's a lot for one sitting, and especially for a orally administered route. So anyways, they're putting this in there, and so if this is modulating anxiety, if it's relieving anxiety, right, and causing drowsiness, right, then we're not going to necessarily, if this is basically working against the CBD, which might cause the same effects. I don't think CBD makes you sleepy, but it can cause a relaxation effect, which can cause some people to be sleepy if they're having trouble relaxing, and then suddenly, they relax and they're like, oh, I can finally sleep, right? And also it has a lot of, anxiety uplifting effects. So it's just wild to me that they administered this drug, which could just be contrasting and, fighting against the CBD's effects, right? So it's like, okay, so they have this present in both the THC heavy and then the CBD heavy route, right? And so with the THC heavy route that has no CBD, suddenly, we still have an anxiety reducing effect by this drug. So, like, I don't know why the fuck, like, this cocktail should not exist whatsoever. There's no point in administering all these fucking drugs. So these results are really shitty. And there's a lot of things that are starting to say that, like, oh, CBD does not have the effect that we thought it had on THC because of this study. And they point to this study, and it's like nobody's read this study because this is the most ass fucking study I've ever seen when it comes to, like this is so terrible, right? And it's just, I don't know if I even have anything else to say. It's just that they administered 5 drugs that could have crazy interactions with the results of the intended purpose of the two drugs that they're trying to administer and interact with, right? There's no reason they shouldn't just remove this, have them take the same things, right, and then monitor the blood 30 minutes to an hour later. There's no reason to increase the blood flow. There's no reason to reduce the stomach acid, because that's, like, we want the stomach acid working as it normally would function, right? So that it digests as it normally would digest. And so we get the results that would normally happen, not altered results based on a fucking drug that is just administered because fuck it. And then we have an opioid-like effect from the cough syrup-esque thing. The cough syrup compound. It's the compound that's in cough syrup. So that's what makes cough syrup make you go crazy if you drink like a bunch of it really quick. And then the midzalum is, reducing anxiety. Like we're basically fighting every effect that both drugs should kind of have somehow through this cocktail, and this cocktail serves no purpose in moderating an actual normal response to these things. It's just fucking up the response. And so it's like, yeah, like if we fuck around and reduce the stomach acid, these effects are compounded because they last longer because there's less stomach acid, so it digests slower. And then also it's like their whole point is like, well, when the CBD is present, there's more THC in the blood, which means there's more THC being used. And it's like, that's not actually what that means. It means that there's more downregulation of the CB1 receptors and that the THC isn't binding to anything, which is why it's in the blood. And that's like the point, is that CBD bounces the THC off those receptors and means there's less negative effects from the THC. So that's the positive. That's what's supposed to happen. And then they're like giving people like things that have opioid and like anxiety reducing effects. Right? And it's like, yeah, I feel chill. It's like of course you do. You're being prescribed a high dosage of these random opioid-esque drugs. And these drugs that might cause you to feel a little bit more drowsy and sleepy, but also, quote unquote relaxed. So it's going to be present with both studies. And again, like it makes sense that, even with the high CBD brownie, so it seems like there's more THC in the bloodstream with the high CBD brownie. Awesome. Right? But like, I feel like the subjective high that they're feeling could also be contributed by the cocktail of drugs that they're taking as well, right? Like, first of all, 5 drugs randomly out of nowhere, like that's crazy, especially like, when they're they're pharmaceutical grade drugs at high dosage, right? But then also just, again, like CBD is just not digested as well. So when you're reducing the stomach acid, it's even digested worse now. And the THC is digested extremely well by the body. So its effects are compounded. But again, even with the CBD high ratio, there was a higher amount of THC in the blood, which means, the CBD was doing what it's doing. And I think that subjective high that the people were feeling, that didn't change between the two results, might be contributed to specifically just the THC still hitting because it's such a high amount of THC. And then also just because of the 5 cocktail of drugs. So this study is just extremely dubious, and it's like there's a lot of things that are pointing to it and being like, CBD doesn't work how we thought it does. THC is actually THC works more effectively, and the bad effects of THC are more present when CBD is high in something. And it's like, this is the study. And it's like nobody read this study because nobody with a rational thought process is going to look at this and be like, yeah, this is a good study. Like if I was like, I'm trying to think of like a good example. If I was like, yeah, I don't know, like caffeine causes brain damage, right? And then the study is like 10 participants with 3 different occasions took 100 milligrams of caffeine, and then 30 minutes later we had them do fucking 3 syringes of heroin. And like the studies show that like their brains morphed crazy from before the study and then after the study. Caffeine must be bad. It's like, I don't think that's how that study. I don't think that study is done properly. I feel like that's not a good study, and that's how I feel about this study. Anyways, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I just wanted to rant about that for a fat fucking minute, because it's just really dubious. And again, I am THC positive. I'm CBD positive. I don't personally want THC, but the effects of CBD. Again, there's some studies suggesting that THC in microdosing is actually is good for the brain. It stimulates a lot of activity, and it helps against old age, Alzheimer's, all these things. And but it has to be microdosing, right? The macrodosing of THC, which is what most people are doing when they're getting giggly high. Which again, to each their own. Do what you will. We're alive and we make choices. But the macrodosing can have negative effects. And it's not something that we should fuck around with discussing and be like, oh, well, all the deaths from THC. And it's like, it's not necessarily about deaths. It's not a fatality. it's not a fatal drug, but it can have negative health consequences over the long term is the thing. But CBD hasn't been shown to have those negative health consequences. And again, the amount of THC that you're probably getting with CBD dominant like hemp versus marijuana and stuff like that is probably closer to that microdose that might be providing positive benefits. But also the CBD is canceling out the THC. And we have a lot of good research to suggest that this is true. And a lot of the research is is very primarily dominant on like higher THC to CBD ratios. So it's like still weed versus like stuff like hemp and whatnot, where the THC ratio is basically like non-existent in comparison to the CBD ratio. And when you're smoking hemp and stuff like that, I use a vaporizer. So that gets rid of most of the negative effects of the smoke, and it just heats up the oils, right? You're getting the CBD is being utilized so much more effectively, and the THC is actually being utilized less effectively than if you were to orally administer the THC and or CBD. So a lot of stuff to consider. But like I said, like a lot of the stuff that they're listing makes absolute sense and does not contradict the studies that CBD downregulates the body's use of THC and downregulates the negative effects of THC because the CBD isn't actually pairing to the CB1 receptors in the brain, right? Like it's literally just logic that would make sense that if the THC isn't pairing to shit, the fucking receptors in the brain, that where would it go? The bloodstream. And you can't draw the conclusion that if there's more THC in the bloodstream, it's not like the digestive process with the CBD created more THC, from the digestion than was in the brownie in the first place. Our bodies aren't, we're not creating matter in our body. We're distributing matter and then creating energy through that matter. But that matter also gets distributed, changed, turned into something else, and then released from the body. But molecularly speaking, we're not creating more THC in the body than what's in the brownie somehow, right? It's just now going to the bloodstream because the CB1 receptor is downregulating it and putting it elsewhere. So anyways, that's my TED Talk. I just wanted to rant about this for a second because it's been fucking tumbling in my brain. I've been looking a lot into CBD recently because I've gotten some high-quality CBD, and I've just been like, I don't want to smoke THC, right? So I've been looking a lot into how the THC responds in the body, and that study suggesting that the minor amounts might actually be beneficial is really cool. And again, I don't try to smoke every day or anything like that. Trying to use it just moderately to my advantage if I get really stressed or something like that. Having just a rough day or something like that, I can pull it out and just be confident that it'll help me move along. But then I've been just looking at a lot of studies that have been saying, not a lot of studies, a lot of things that have been saying, negative things about the CBD, and they kind of all point to this study, and this study is ass. So I really think that there's a lot more research to suggest that CBD is extremely effective and positive, and those studies were done extremely effectively. And then there's this study that's just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna fucking dope up our patients with a bunch of bullshit and measure the results, see what happens. And you might be like, oh, well, it's happening like 30 minutes after they've ingested it or whatever. But like, keep in mind that it takes like up to 2 hours for THC and CBD both to be digested, right? So you're slowing down the digestive process while it's still happening before it's even really hitting. It might be starting to hit, but you're slowing it down while, especially with a brownie and stuff like that, that's gonna be sitting in your stomach for like 2 hours. So you're slowing it down while that process is happening, and that's just dubious and ingenuine to the study that you're trying to produce. So anyways, bye.